While dragons burned the riverlands and Targaryens slaughtered one another for the Iron Throne, another war was unfolding far from King's Landing. Black sails appeared off the western coast. Fishing villages vanished beneath smoke and fire. Merchant ships disappeared beneath the waves. The harbor of Lannisport burned for days as screaming captives were dragged onto Ironborn longships. And behind it all was a 16-year-old lord from Pike, Dalton Greyjoy, the Red Kraken. Long before Balon Greyjoy crowned himself king, before Euron Greyjoy became the terror of the seas, there was Dalton Greyjoy, perhaps the most feared Ironborn reaver in Westerosi history. For a few bloody years during the Dance of the Dragons, the old way returned to Westeros, and the West paid the price. Even by Ironborn standards, Dalton Greyjoy was considered terrifying. He rode his first longship at the age of 5. By 10, he was already reaving alongside his uncle in the Basilisk Isles. And by 14, Dalton had fought in a dozen battles as far away as Old Gis, taking salt wives and earning a reputation for reckless brutality. Somewhere during those early campaigns, Dalton claimed a Valyrian steel sword from the corpse of a dead corsair. He named the blade Nightfall. An archmaester from Harlaw would later write of Dalton Greyjoy, "He loved 3 things: the sea, his sword, and women." Then came the battle that made him legendary. At just 15 years old, Dalton watched his uncle die fighting in the Stepstones. Instead of retreating, the young Ironborn charged into the slaughter himself. By the end of the battle, Dalton Greyjoy emerged drenched in blood from a dozen wounds. After that day, men began calling him the Red Kraken. Dalton later returned home to Pike after hearing his father had died. Now Lord of the Iron Islands, the Red Kraken immediately began building longships, forging weapons, and gathering warriors. When his men asked why, Dalton simply answered, "The storm is coming." He was right. In 129 AC, King Viserys I died, and the Targaryen dynasty tore itself apart in the civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons. The realm split between the Greens of King Aegon II and the Blacks of Queen Rhaenyra. And while dragons battled above castles and armies marched across the riverlands, Dalton Greyjoy saw opportunity. The Greens offered him honors, a seat on the small council, the office of Master of Ships. But Rhaenyra's faction understood Dalton far better than their enemies did. The Red Kraken did not care about titles. He wanted blood, he wanted plunder, he wanted war. So instead of asking Dalton to defend Blackwater Bay, the Blacks pointed him toward the western coast of Westeros, toward the Lannisters. It was the perfect moment to strike. Lord Jason Lannister had marched east with much of his strength, leaving the western coast exposed. And so the Ironborn descended like a storm. Dalton Greyjoy burned the Lannister fleet and captured what ships remained. Lannisport, one of the richest cities in Westeros, was sacked. Its harbor glowed red beneath columns of smoke. Warehouses burned, ships sank in the bay. And all across the city, people fled from Ironborn raiders pouring through the streets. Gold, grain, and trade goods were carried back to the Iron Islands. But worse still were the captives. Hundreds of women and girls were dragged onto longships and taken as salt wives, including the favorite mistress of Jason Lannister and even some of his natural daughters. While dragons burned armies in the east, the west drowned in fire and salt water. And Dalton Greyjoy was only getting started. The Red Kraken seized Fair Isle and took Faircastle for his own seat. He nearly captured Case. At the height of his power, Dalton ruled the Sunset Sea much like the ancient Ironborn kings of old. Even House Lannister struggled to stop him. After Jason Lannister died during the dance, his widow, Joanna Lannister, ruled Casterly Rock as regent for their young son. And unlike many others during the war, Joanna refused to break. While Dalton terrorized the coast, Joanna fought back relentlessly. She rebuilt fleets, raised armies, led forces against the Ironborn near Case while wearing armor herself. Songs later claimed Joanna slew a dozen Iron Men in battle, though the truth is less clear. What mattered was this: the Lions of the West had not surrendered, but neither had Dalton Greyjoy. When Joanna attempted to rebuild the Western Fleet, Dalton burned her shipyards and carried off another 100 women into slavery. When Westermen attempted to retake Fair Isle, the Red Kraken ambushed their fleet beneath black sails and sent the heads of Lord Prester, Lord Tarbeck, and Sir Erwin Lannister back to Casterly Rock. For the better part of 2 years, Dalton Greyjoy became one of the most dangerous men in Westeros. And the terrifying part is that he was planning even more. As the Dance of the Dragons ended, Dalton gathered hundreds of longships near Fair Isle and the western coast. The Red Kraken reportedly intended to conquer the Shield Islands and Driftmark, as well as sack Old Town and Sunspear. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that the Ironborn might truly restore the old way, that they might become kings of the sea once again. But Dalton Greyjoy had built his power almost entirely through fear, and fear rarely survives the men who create it. In 133 AC, while sleeping in Faircastle, the Red Kraken was murdered by one of his own salt wives, a woman named Tess. After Dalton had taken his pleasure with her, Tess drew the Red Kraken's own dagger and cut his throat open from ear to ear. Then she threw herself, naked and bloody, into the sea below. No dragon killed Dalton Greyjoy. No rival king brought him down. In the end, the Red Kraken died alone in bed. And the moment he died, everything he built began collapsing around him. The Ironborn fleet shattered almost overnight as captains abandoned Fair Isle and sailed home. The conquered people of the West rose in rebellion, slaughtering isolated Ironborn garrisons across the coast. Then the Iron Islands themselves descended into chaos. Dalton had never taken a true rock wife, only dozens of salt wives, leaving behind rival heirs and ambitious relatives. Ironborn houses turned on one another in a bloody struggle for the Seastone chair, while Joanna Lannister finally took her revenge. Westermen fleets sailed for the Iron Islands, burning villages and killing Ironborn lords by the dozens. One of Dalton's sons was captured, gelded, and turned into a fool at Casterly Rock. For a few violent years, the old way had returned to Westeros. The Sunset Sea belonged to the Ironborn once again. Then the storm passed, and the sea swallowed it all.